Okay, so the Berditchever comments on the first psukim in this week's parsha, Vayetze Yaakov mi be'er shava vayelech harana. Let's just read the psukim here in their literal translation first to understand the general context, and then we'll see how the Kedushas Levi unveils the most glorious layers of meaning that we never would have saw otherwise without the tzaddik taking our hand and guiding us. So the pasuk says, "Vayetze Yaakov mi be'er shava vayelech harana." Yaakov Avinu leaves the place of Be'er Shava, and he travels toward Haran, of course, running away from his brother Esav, as Yitzchak Avinu is telling him to go away. Vayifka b'makom, what happens? He encounters b'makom, the place. No, it was the makom hamikdash. Vayalin sham, and he sleeps there, kiba hashemesh, because the sun had set. And we know from Chazal that HaKadosh Baruch Hu had caused the sun to set before it was ordinarily going to set, because Hashem wanted Yaakov Avinu to spend time dafka in that place. Vayikach me'avne hamakom, we know that he collects the disparate stones of the place. Vayasem me'rashoisav, and he puts the stones under his head. Vayishkav b'makom ahu, and he rests in that place. Vayachalim, very famously, Yaakov Avinu has a dream. Ve'ine sulam mutzav arza, there is a ladder in the dream that is rooted on the ground. Ve'roisha megia shamayma, and the top of the ladder is rising to the heavens. Ve'hine malache elikim oilim v'yardim bay, and angels of God are ascending and descending this ladder. There's a lot of Torah here, just on the level of pshat and midrashim. Now we're just literally reading and translating the words. And the pasuk ends this episode, V'hine Hashem nitzav alav. HaKadosh Baruch Hu appeared upon the vision, presiding over the scene. Vayomer, and Hashem says to Yaakov Avinu, Ani Hashem, I am Yud-Ke Vav-Ke, the infinite mystery. Elokei Avraham, the father of Avraham, Avicha, your father, your grandfather, Elokei Yitzchak, and the God of Yitzchak, your father, Haaretz Asher Ata Shoichev Aleha, the land upon which you are laying, L'cha etnena ulazarecha, I shall give it to you and to your children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren after them, to the Jewish nation. L'cha etnena ulazarecha. And the pasuk continues, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, V'ratzta yamav v'kedma, and so on and so forth, the first direct communication between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Yaakov Avinu. Says the Berditchever, what's going on here? There's so much depth. There's so much depth. But the Berditchever wants to introduce us to one perspective that is absolutely mind-blowing, the way that he reads these psukim. So he says the following. Vayetze Yaakov mi be'er shava ad soif haparsha. He says, take a look over there at these psukim until ad soif haparsha. He doesn't mean the whole entire parsha till the end of parsha Vayetze, until the end of this episode. We're also going to understand why do we refer to the Chag of Chanukah that's coming up Be'ezras Hashem in another few weeks. We call it Chanukah when it was a nace that doesn't seem to have anything to do with the concept of chinuch. The main thing is the shemen. B'shemen lashon Chanukah. The main thing was the nace of the oil. You'd think it would have something to do with the oil. That was the miracle. Sure, they were mechanech the Beis Hamikdash again, Chanukas Habayis, and they re-celebrated and they re-commemorated. They rededicated rather the Beis Hamikdash. But what is the deeper reason that we refer to Chanukah in this lashon? So first he says, let's figure out what the lashon of Chanukah actually is. Says the Berditchever Rav, ki Chanukah hu milashon chinuch. Chanukah comes from the terminology of chinuch. Chinuch is a hard word to translate. It doesn't just mean education, because you can educate adults, right? Chinuch is usually something that relates specifically to children. Nurturing might be a little bit closer, but even then, what exactly is this thing, chinuch? What does it mean? We know that there are halachas of chinuch. What is the actual goal of chinuch? Which is a very important question for parents. So he says, what is chinuch? V'toichan advarim. Demetzinu v'torah gabi chinuch habegadim shel kehanim. When it comes to preparing the begadim, the bigdei kuhuna, shenemar lamali es yadam l'kohen, to prepare the begadim to be worn by the kohanim, Dihine kol davar asher nase makoim lahashras hakedusha elyoina tzrichim mikoydem lasas kliva achana ubeis kibel sheyeh makam lakedusha haba acher kach lisharis badavar hahu. He says anything, kol davar, anything, asher nase makam lahashras hakedusha elyoina, which is going to become a place where the heavenly kedusha rests. Tzricha mikoydem lasas kli. It needs to be made into a vessel. Vahachana. It needs to be prepared. Ubeis kibel. It needs to have the opportunity to settle within it. It needs to be formed and ready. So that there should be space for the holiness that will come afterwards. Lishreis b'davar ahu, to rest within this vessel. V'zen nikra chinuch. And this is what chinuch is called. And again, on a simple level, you can read this like we are mechanech, a child, to do mitzvahs. B'mitzvahs, which is how we ordinarily think of chinuch, and we're even machmir on chinuch. Halachically, before 6, at least for brachas and other things, we're not chayiv chinuch yet until 6. Who waits until their son is 6 years old to teach him how to make a bracha? Nobody does. We're mahader until 3, right? And some people even before that. So we think about chinuch in terms of helping the child to be murgal, helping them to be used to doing mitzvahs. And that's what we think. We're inducting them into the ranks of those who do mitzvahs, so that when they become bar chiyuvim, bas mitzvah, bar mitzvah, and they become adults, they should already be familiar with the vicissitudes of Jewish living. That's how we ordinarily think of it. But the way that the Berditchever is saying this now is really, it's not about the doing of the mitzvahs and getting them used to doing mitzvahs. That's not what it's about. What is it then about? It's about helping them progress in such a way that there should be space for the kedusha that will come achar kach. It's not about the mitzvahs that they're doing when they're in a state of having the experience of having someone be mechanech them, so that they're washing, netilas yadayim, and they're making brachas, and they're davening, and so on and so forth, in the same way that they will be davening and doing mitzvahs later on. That's not the nakuda here. The nakuda of chinuch is we want to make space so that when the kedusha comes down, they're open to it. They're open to it. Very deep. What does it mean to be mechanech, a child in mitzvahs? Sheyehei kli mizumenes. He should be a ready vessel, lekabel hashras hakadusha, to accept and to receive the resting of holiness, shechal alav, that will eventually come down onto that boy, onto that girl, be'is gedulasai, when that individual child grows up. And the implication of the difference between how we ordinarily translate and think of chinuch and this approach is vast. Because there might come a time, and every parent has to be very wise about exactly when to implement and how to implement, and it takes a lot of tefillah, and it takes a lot of thinking, and it takes a lot of sensitivity, which I bless us all with. But there might come a time when in the name of chinuch, we would withhold ourselves from pushing our children to do things that we think fit into category A of chinuch, meaning they gotta do the mitzvah. This is what chinuch is. We gotta get them into doing mitzvahs. If it's going to detract from the category B, or the second definition of chinuch, which as we've now learned means that they should be open, they should have space, so that when they become a little bit more mature and older, and when the kedusha actually comes down upon them, they haven't been closed up to it already. This is a completely different definition of chinuch than most people are aware of, because they wouldn't think of it. What do you mean? My kid has to make a bracha, and if they don't, I'm going to guilt them into it, and I'm going to make it clear to them that I'm disappointed with them, because what is this business? A first grader, a frum first grader, doesn't want to wash? What is this? What is it? You have to wash, and there's a time for that. But chas v'shalom, it's like I mentioned, it's never, you can't point to the hamburger that made you, not you, any of you, or myself, that made me fat, right? I can't point to the single, but slowly but surely over time, if we're not careful, then in the name of chinuch, with all of our positive intentions, chas v'shalom, we could potentially cause the opposite effect. Or by the time they become bar mitzvah or bas mitzvah, they're so closed up because of our chinuch, again with the best intentions, that there's no room for the kedusha to come into an open heart, because the heart's already been bolted shut, because of how belittled they felt and how forced they felt and restricted they felt, because they're just kids. So it's a delicate balance, because there certainly is an element of, well, we want them to be familiar with Yiddishkeit, sure we do, but in the name of that, we don't chas v'shalom want them to close up so that they're opposed to it and they're not excited about it and they think that it's overbearing and doesn't give them good feeling inside. So this is a very delicate balancing act, and it's as I'm mechanech my children, I struggle with this too, but I'm very aware of it, super aware of it, and I always ask myself before I want to push again, what's the point here? What is the tachlis? Is the tachlis that Yaakov Klein can't conceive of the fact that his 5-year-old is not going to wash before having challah for the Shabbos Suda, so that I need to make sure that he washes because, well, that's my kid is going to wash? Is that the point? Or is the point to say we want to encourage, but we want to be mechanechim that he should have space, so that when he gets a little bit more mature and when he understands a little bit more about why this is useful, he'll already be open to it. And there's a big difference there. So that's just point number one. And again, the piece hasn't even started yet. He's just parenthetically putting out like a huge klal on chinuch. He hasn't begun saying what he wants to say yet, but just very, very important. If you came just for this alone, I think this is already a huge gilui. If we would educate this way in schools and etc. Okay, that's step one. Now, Vihine, Yaakov Avinu histakel biyichud elyon. Yaakov Avinu was privy to Ruach HaKodesh. He was looking at the world in the broadest, deepest, truest way. And he understood that at the core of existence, Vihine Yaakov Avinu histakel biyichud elyon, when he looked at the earliest, highest, the most exalted foundation of being, he looked into what's called the Yichud Elyon. He looked into the place of the mysterious divine unity with every Jewish soul, Mereishis HaMachshava. He looked up into the initial, earliest dawn of divinity, beyond all the layers of creation, just the highest point, the earliest point of creation, which the Mekubalim say is wrapped up with God's will. What did he want? Because that's the first seed of creation. You have to want, and then a process unfolds. What did Hashem want? Ve'ra'ah, and he saw, she is Soid Kala Olamais, that the premise, the foundation of all worlds, and it doesn't mean like different planets, all layers and realms within the world that we inhabit, the core of it, Hu Knesset Yisrael, is the Jewish nation. K'maimer Chachamim Zchon Avrachas Chazal say Yisrael Allah b'machshava tchila. Am Yisrael were first to arise within the thought process, so to speak, of Hashem as he underwent the process of creating the world. The first thing he thought of is, gotta have a Jewish nation. Bereishis bara. Not in the beginning God created, say Chazal, Bereishis, with the beginning. What's the beginning? Who's called Reishis? Am Yisrael are called Reishis. Bereishis bara Elokim es hashamayim v'sa'aretz. With the Jewish nation in mind, God said, now we can build a world. B'shvil Yisrael shenei kraim Reishis, and as we often say in the Shir, and this is a crucial point that very few people are speaking about today, certainly not loudly enough, is that sure, we're chosen, but why? So that we should put our feet up and feel entitled and feel better than everyone else? No way. We were chosen to show all of humanity that all of us are chosen, that all of us are in the divine image. We were chosen to communicate messages directly, indirectly, to reveal the presence of God in the world, for all humanity, for all of creation. But ultimately that couldn't be done without Hashem singling out a priesthood sect within the broader family of humans, which is called Mamleches Kohanim. We are the priestly sect, all of us, each and every one of us, men and women and children and all of us, to give a Torah to, so that we can then transmit it to all of humanity, so that we have any hope of really coming together as a human family, which will happen, Be'ezer Hashem. So that's why we were chosen. But we sit at the core of the beginning of creation, because without Am Yisrael, forget it. Just forget it. So therefore, if this is what Yaakov Avinu reflected on, and he thought very deeply about what is this world all about, it's about rectifying physicality by recognizing the spirituality within it. This is what the world is. And Am Yisrael are that nation that's meant to bring that message to all of humanity. He says, what does that mean that Yaakov thought about this? He thought about Vehem Nikraim Even Haresha. He thought about the primordial stone, Even Haresha, the foundation stone, upon which the entire structure of creation in time and space relies. The foundation stone, which is Am Yisrael, called Even Haresha. Shemimenu hush sasa olam, just like the Even Shasia, that the whole of creation flows forth from this stone. Al pipnimius, who are that stone? Am Yisrael. Because without the will that's bound up with a Jewish nation proudly standing tall and going on the offensive with our mission, we play defense so much. It's incredible. We have to play offense. More on that, Be'ezer Hashem, a different time. But when we play offense and we mamish proudly discharge our obligation vis-a-vis the Creator, so then we are the Even Shasia. That's why creation flows forth, based on the premise of there being a nation that's ready to serve as priests, as Kohanim, on behalf of humanity. Because Am Yisrael are the foundation of all the worlds, the heavenly realms, and the realms below. And in that place, Am Yisrael are called Even, Haniskele, like we said before, like the Even Shasia, Lashon Yachid. We are all one in that place. There is no such thing in that place as individual Jews or individual communities. It's just the shining collective soul of Yisrael. What's called in the Svar Makdashim, Knesses Yisrael. It's just one soul. It's the Jewish spirit. Kisham Nisached Klalis Yisrael. In that place, all of the Jewish souls throughout history and wherever they find themselves in the world, in that place at our core, and we've spoken about this in the past, if you remember the pre-Tisha B'Av Shir that I gave on behalf of Chizuk Mission, in that place, our inner identity, we spoke about then, Kisham Nesached Klalis Yisrael Ba'achtus Ha'amiti B'Mazal Elyon. We are all one, and therefore we are called Even. And Yaakov Avinu cared very deeply about this, because what else are we alive for? I sit next to my son for hours every day next to the incubator. What a privilege. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu is bringing down such nisim. It's unbelievable. And it forces you to really think about life, because why is this worth it? Why is this whole thing worth it? We're bringing children into a world that's fraught with hatred and pain and difficulty and sadness. We have to really think very deeply. What are we living for? What is it for? Honestly, what is it for? And so when you think in this way and it concerns you, and you walk down the street and you think about it, and you're in the store and you think about it, and wherever you find yourself throughout the different areas of daily life, this is on your mind and this is in your heart, and it should be on the minds and hearts of every Jew. We get caught up with such katnus, myself included, but I'm working on it. But I think deeply. I want to think about the world. I want to think about Hashem. I want to think about the goal, the tachlis. And this is what we're here for as a nation. We get caught up in small stupidity. We thought very big, and we reflected on life. So then this is the lineage, this is the tradition of Yaakov Avinu, who spent all of his time thinking about the Even. about the collectivity of Am Yisrael, about our national mission, about why life matters, about what our goal is, where we're from and where we're headed, and to think very deeply and contemplate, well, how are we going to discharge that obligation? How am I making sure that in my own life I'm aligned with it? How are we setting up our community so that we're moving forward and not backwards? How are we bringing the world closer to Geula? So Yaakov Avinu nasan sichloi umachshavtoi v'iniach moichoi al zeh ha'inyan. This is where Yaakov's head was at. This is what Yaakov thought about the whole day. The Evan Haresha, this stone, which, by the way, he literally was. I mean, Yaakov Avinu was, and as much as all the other Jews, right, are descended from him, Yaakov Avinu is the Kisei HaKavod. The face of Yaakov is on the Kisei HaKavod, from under which the Zohar HaKadosh tells us all Jewish souls are hewn out from that space. So Yaakov Avinu is the Evan, right? And that's what he thought about all the time. The Evan Shesiya. Am Yisrael, Knesses Yisrael. And this is what Yaakov Avinu yearned to actualize the potential mission of the Jewish nation. Mishoresh, from the source, Asher Misham Raya Even Yisrael, where we can foster, as the Pasuk of Bereshit says, from there we can foster this stone. We can bring it out, Elespashtus, to allow it to flow forth. L'ntaya Knesses Yisrael, Yaakov Avinu wanted to plant this Jewish spirit so deeply, Binyan Shalim, and to build an eternal foundation, as he eventually will succeed in doing with the third Beis HaMikdash that we know as Keneged Yaakov Avinu. B'chol inyana, b'shneim asar shiftei ka, with the 12 shvatim bound together, each one having their own approach. Hamachuva neged yud beis gvuli alachsain, which align with the 12 lines of reality. This gets a little bit involved, not going into the whole thing now. Very basically, the letters yud ke vav ke could be permutated, meaning could be ordered in 12 different ways, right? 4 times 4, you're able to permutate them in 12 different ways if you take it, and each time you mix up the letters in a different way. And then if you take a square that has 4 sides and you count up the dividing lines between each of the sides and the top, the dividing lines between 2 panels, right? There are 12 of them. And so the number 12 makes up our 3-dimensional reality, and it's all rooted in the 4 letters of Yud Ke Vav Ke. Not getting into it now. This is the 12 Shvatim. We are the foundations for 3-dimensional reality, what we call reality, which is just virtual reality. But for us, it's reality. So Yaakov Avinu wanted to bring out these 12 Shvatim, serve as the Even Shesiya, fill the world with vitality, with meaning, with joy. Do you ever notice how sad the world is? You walk the streets these days, people are just sad. And Yaakov Avinu envisioned a world where people are just okay, where they're happy, where there's brotherhood. I'm telling you, sometimes people think like I'm some naive idealist. I see it so clearly. It's so easy. We could do it. We could do it. We mamish could do it. We will do it. We absolutely must do it. The world is waiting for us to do it. Right? So Yaakov Avinu was thinking about this. He wanted to bring the world to this place full of life and clarity and togetherness. And to serve as the Merkava, the chariot, for all 600,000 root souls of the Jewish nation. As Chazal say, Ein Shechina Shaira. When will the Shechina ultimately rest in the world? Shishim Ribo Yisrael, when the whole expansivity of Am Yisrael unfolds throughout history. And to be one unit made up of various parts, each of which are precious in and of themselves. The men, for what the men can do. The woman, for what the woman can do and will do. And all the different Shvatim, with all the different flags, and all the different energies, and all the different Evarim, and the Lev of Am Yisrael, and the Yadayim of Am Yisrael, and the Raglayim of Am Yisrael. Each and every piece doing its part without one feeling that it's superior to the others, and without one claiming that there's only one way. No, it's the beautiful harmony of all of Am Yisrael coming together to serve this one purpose that's greater than any of the parts. That has nothing to do with any of the parts, but it has to do with the light that they are meant to reflect, which is one, which is singular. For everything to be aligned with the spiritual source. And to bring out this holy stone, from this unified place down into the particularities of life, of this world. Yaakov Avinu was placing his head on a singular rock. This is what he wanted. What does it mean he put his head on a singular rock? Means this is where his whole thought was focused. This is what he was thinking about, worried about, contemplating all the time. And so this was Yaakov's intention. He wanted to lay his head, he wanted to think and focus just on one rock, just on one unified rock, which represents Knesset Yisrael at their root, to allow them to manifest, to allow them to proliferate, to allow this vision of a world that's lit up with the presence of Hashem and with the consciousness of the presence of Hashem, so that people can finally stop killing each other, so that we can live in harmony and in brotherhood and in peace. This was Yaakov Avinu's whole plan. Of course, the psukim aren't to be taken out of their literal meaning, just because now we have a deeper mystical insight. Of course, we mean it literally. Yaakov Avinu did end up laying his physical head on a physical rock. This is another big klal in Pnimius HaTorah, because in the Sfarim of the Mekubalim and of the Hasidim and others, all the psukim are taken to really represent and be symbolic of such big ideas. So the B'ditchever, those big ideas are the root, are the core, but don't think that this didn't actually happen as well. Yeah, the Yaakov Avinu was a person, not just a concept or a persona, and he did lay his physical head on a physical rock upon which he poured oil. That's true. As the pasuk tells us, but Yaakov Avinu was the whole time in his head, he was contemplating something far deeper than what his physical body was acting out. The main thing for Yaakov Avinu was the spiritual stone. Hirashis hamachshava, the foundation stone, the Even Shesiya of Am Yisrael, Hipinas Yisoid Ha'olam, which is the foundation of the entire structure of reality. To draw it out from potential to actuality, and let it be this glorious palace, with different towers and different rooms and different wings. Many different kinds of tzaddikim, each of whom carry their own message, and many different kinds of Torah scholars. This was the whole thing of Yaakov. But his whole thing was again to look at the Achdus Shal Knesset Yisrael. Where are we one? Where we are all focused at our singular mission, because that's what binds us together. What we're actually all here for. That's bigger than any one particular community. It's Am Yisrael. Am Yisrael, reflecting the unity of our source, of our Creator. At Soif Kal HaDoros, and from the beginning of history all the way till the end of history. But then there was a problem. Because Va'achar Kach Ra'a Yaakov B'Ruach Kodshay, Yaakov Avinu saw with his Ruach HaKodesh Hirus Shal Knesset Yisrael, that this holy perspective, this broad-minded, Moichin the Godless, expanded consciousness, Geula perspective, it wouldn't last. Because Am Yisrael would be shattered, splintered. There would be a Churban Beis HaMikdash. Our unified home, which rendered all of us a family that had one home to come back to 3 times a year, would be destroyed. The Goydel Acharon Af, and there would be a tremendous amount of divine wrath, concealment, v'hadinim sha'avra Yisrael, and the difficulties and the challenges that we would go through, that we did go through, and that we are still going through now. And this is what the pasuk tells us based on this introduction. This is what the pasuk means. Listen to the way he reads these pasukim. Pile plois. What a gilui, what a revelation, unbelievable revelation. Vayetze Yaakov mi be'er Sheva. What does this mean? Yaakov Avinu left the place called Be'er Sheva, meaning Ritzaloymar. Yaakov Avinu had to leave that broad-minded focus, that yearning for this to become revealed in the world. He had to go away from this thing called Be'er Sheva. Sheva being a reference to the sevenness of physical experience. 7 days of the week, 7 colors of the rainbow, 7 metals, 7 oceans, etc., etc., etc. That's the physical world. Be'er Sheva. Yaakov Avinu had previously been focusing on the core, the Be'er, from which all of the sevenness of nature drew its vitality. The Even Shasiya, he has to leave that place. He looked at the Yaakov Avinu had to turn away from that perspective. And he had to remember and realize and recognize that Am Yisrael wouldn't be able to maintain this perspective throughout history because Vayelech Charana. Because Yaakov Avinu then focused on the amount of anger, challenge, difficulty, concealment that the Jewish nation would experience. That's Vayelech Charana, of course, a form of the word Charon Af, anger. He looked at the trials and tribulations and the pain that Am Yisrael would go through. And Yaakov Avinu cried for us. He knew what would happen on October 7th, 2023. Yaakov Avinu saw it all, and Yaakov Avinu cried. Tsar Goydel Atzaris, the incredible depth of our pain, Asher Yizblu Zare Begalus, that his children, who he loved, and his grandchildren, who he adored, would suffer in exile. And you know what the most painful part of all of it was? Is that the practical disunity of being disbanded from our land and cast into exile would cause a spiritual yurida in the sense of our perception. We call this a gullus mentality. We would forget what this whole thing is about. We would forget who we are. Yiddishkeit in and of itself would become constricted. We would lose the capacity to speak a language of geula. We would lose our way. We would lose the plot. That was the most intense part of the tsar of what we would go through and what we've been through. But the pasuk continues, Vayifka b'makayim. What does it mean, literally? Vayifka b'makam, and he encountered the place, right? Chazal say this is a very important place. Yaakov Avinu himself says, Ein zakim beis alikim is a shara shamayim. This is the house of God. This is the shara shamayim, the gates of heaven. What does it mean, Vayifka b'makam? Who do we refer to with the word hamakam? HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And Vayifka could mean that which impacts. Vayifka, pogeya. So Yaakov Avinu understood, sure, Am Yisrael are going to go through a lot of pain and exile, and it's horrific, and it's tragic, and it's sad. But then Yaakov Avinu, in his greatness, began to reflect on the extent of the sadness in the most existential of ways. Not just that human beings will feel physical pain, or that even spiritually they'll be withheld from reaching their madrigas. Who does this all impact? Because why are we all here? Vayifka b'makayim. This is going to get in the way of Hashem's plan. Aside from this, that his children and grandchildren, that Am Yisrael would suffer, Yaakov Avinu was suffering, was crying, was mourning. This, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu would be impacted by this. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is with us in our pain. He is suffering along with our suffering because we are Him. We are Him. We are a chelik alikamimal. We are sparks of divinity cast down into separate physical bodies, so intense that make us forget our actual identity. So of course He suffers because we suffer, and we don't need to suffer. And in asking HaKadosh Baruch Hu to save us, instead we should be reflecting on this, that, well, we have Him inside of us. We can save ourselves. And if we do that, it will emerge that, well, He saved us. Because we followed Him in us. We followed our souls. We aligned ourselves with what this life is really about. Very deep. So Yaakov Avinu was thinking in such a broad way, in such a deep way. And Yaakov Avinu was crying over the pain of the divine presence that is absent, that's not able to become revealed. How does it become revealed? It's there objectively, but subjectively people aren't recognizing it. They're going through life ignoring the obvious. And whose fault is it? It's my fault, and it's your fault, and it's our fault. And it's not either our fault. It's because we've been in exile and we've forgotten along the way. So Hashem sent us tzaddikim, but we ignore them largely. And so me and you are waking up. We must wake up. We must change. We must change. We have to shift toward a geula-oriented perspective. So this is what Yaakov Avinu was crying over. This is what he was crying over. Yaakov Avinu watched the spiritual sunset. He fell asleep. All the light was gone. Because he looked at Am Yisrael in exile, the Galus Hashchina, and the exile of the divine presence, v'nifsek me'advekus, and he fell away from attachment to God, and he fell into despair. And you know what happened next? He began to collect the fragmented shards of that unified stone. It was once unified. He had contemplated that stone and he wanted to put his head on it. But in exile, it had been shattered into 1,000,000 pieces. And everybody was busy with intra-communal politics. And this one was scared of that one, and this one was scared of what this one's going to say. And in the meantime, nothing happened and we have no leadership. And so our children feel like they have no reason to stay in the fold. And so it was a bit of a mess. It was a bit of a mess. And so Yaakov Avinu began to put together these shards of this unified rock once again. Slowly but surely. You know what happened? Yaakov began to think about this. Began to think about this deeply. What did he put his head on? Me'avnei hamakom. A bunch of different disparate pieces that the unified Knesset, Evan of Knesset Yisrael had become. Ki zekai al hirus Knesset Yisrael shenifradu. We've become separated. We've fallen into this worldliness on an individual and a communal level. Like I said, we lost the plot. What is this all for? And here the tide turns. Vayachalim. Vayachalim can mean to dream, but it could also mean, as it's used in Psukim, to become strong. Vayachalim. He strengthened himself. Yaakov Avinu began to strengthen himself and encourage himself. Yaakov Avinu understood so deeply that even though it may look like the exile only impacts in this world, it reaches the Shemayim. Because Yaakov Avinu was thinking about it in the deepest way. That's the vision that he saw. He saw a ladder that the feet were planted on the ground, but the top of it, Yaakov Avinu again was focused on the tsar, on the pain of Hashem, on the big picture implication of Gullus, that Gullus isn't just a physical state, but it's a state of mind. It's a state of heart. It's a constriction of perspective. It's not just in this world that we become weak, but that causes the spiritual energy that's meant to be filling the world to become similarly weak. I think Yaakov Avinu understood something very deep. He understood that in truth, Am Yisrael would not waste away in the Gullus and the exile. But on the contrary, Al Yedei HaGullus, through our journey in exile, with all of the constriction and all the smallness and all the problems that we're experiencing, Yesh aliyah lekamani tzotzes hakadoshim. Sparks would be elevated. V'hine malachi elikim oilim. Asher yesh lahem aliyah. We would pick up beautiful cultural sparks as we have along the way. This is totally okay. This is meant to be. That Am Yisrael are like a magnet for every good trend, to be able to take the different technological advancements and to use them. We didn't create it, but we can onboard it so that it serves our mission. We can pick up musical elements from other cultures, which we did. We can pick up different foods from different places, which we did, and we make brachas on those foods in a way that those pizza would never have had a bracha made on it if Am Yisrael hadn't been in Italy, an onboarded pizza. And we go through step by step in every way, and there's much more to talk about here. I'm trying to condense all of Yiddishkeit now into about 6 minutes. There's so much that that we get from the whole Galus experience. And that's fine. And people who say we should never be impacted, there's no such thing. Am Yisrael have always been impacted. Our Yiddishkeit looks very different than the Rambam's Yiddishkeit looked, because he was in Morocco, and over there he was impacted by the culture around him. And this is exactly what Hashem had in mind, that Am Yisrael should become like David HaMelech, what's referred to in the Zohar Kodesh as the eyeball that contains all the colors. We are the moon that reflects the manifold sunlight of all of humanity, and we purify all those elements and we bring it up to Hashem. That's what we were supposed to do. So our nation had to go on this whole world tour, which has taken about 2,000 years, but now we're coming home in order to rectify all of humanity. So Yaakov Avinu strengthened himself with this. And he said, it's true, so that what we go through in exile on the ground impacts Shamayim, but it's all part of a much bigger picture. And everything is lichatchila. Hashem has a big story He's telling. We're a tiny part of it. It's a big story. Everything's going precisely according to plan. But then Yaakov Avinu also reflected on the nuanced complexity of this, that in exile we also lose a lot. Hanikra malachi elikim. We lose a lot in the process. And so what do we do when we are meant to go into Galus so that we can impact the nations of the world, and we're meant to cultivate different elements of the culture and to lift them and elevate them into emes, into Kedusha, and integrate them? But what do we do when there's a Yerida? Yaakov Hizkeres Atzmai. So then Yaakov Avinu, again, it's all a thought process. It's an internal conversation Yaakov Avinu is having with himself. Yaakov Avinu then reminded himself, V'hine Hashem nitzav alav. Shekivan shegali Yisrael, don't forget, Am Yisrael are in exile, and the exile is going to have karbanos. There's going to be detrimental effects of the exile. Hashchina kiviyachol imahem. V'hine Hashem nitzav alav. Hashem is positioned there. Aderech imay anoichi b'tzara. Hashem is with us. Forget about our own pain. Let's focus on Hashem. When Hashem saw that Yaakov Avinu was ready, that he had expanded his perspective to include all of creation, not just his own little life and not just his own little considerations, but Hashem's master plan, which should be at the forefront of the Jewish conscience. So then Hashem speaks to Yaakov, and he says, this land that you're laying on, which means that you're so worried about the process of history and the gullus and the exile and the losses and the gains and the turbulent ups and downs and the fragmentation of this unified stone of Am Yisrael into 12 different stones. And Hashem says, don't worry. This land that used to unify us, represents our unity from which we've been exiled. It started here, it will end here. I'm bringing you back home. V'hini anochi im chosh marticha, and I'm with you and I'll guard you. Even in exile. Anochi imahem, I am with them. Ve'eshmar isam, and I will guard them. V'ashivoisich ala adama, and I will bring you back to Eretz Yisrael. Ritzoleimar af shegalu, even though we went into exile. Ashe ve'shvusam ve'ekabalisam. We're witnessing this with our own eyes. Some of us may have had the privilege, if you're on now or will be watching later, the recording. You've been a part of that process. Those who have been zochet to make aliyah, to move to that place. We're witnessing it with our own eyes. History is coming to the culmination. Until I will do what I promised you. You know what happens when Hashem tells him that and reminds him of that? And tells him, and that's what we're experiencing now, that as we get closer and closer to the Geula, it's like the sun rising. Again, we're going to be privy to these levels of understanding, the language, the likes of which hadn't been spoken for 1,000, 2,000 years in exile, but from the advent of the Baal Shem Tov in 1840, which opened the gates, and now Kabbalah and Hasidus and Pnimis HaTorah and spirituality is just available for everyone. We're getting closer and closer to the Geula. This is part of the Geula. And the sun is rising again. It's painful, but the sun is rising. So you know what happened to Yaakov Avinu, which should be in bold also, these psukim. Vayikatz Yaakov mishnasei. Yaakov wakes up. From that state of constricted functionality, that Yaakov Avinu fell into despondency, into hopelessness. Yaakov Avinu woke up from shehu b'stalkus hamoichin, from having lost this broader perspective, machmas cheshches hagalos v'tzarin shel Yisrael, because of the pain of Am Yisrael. Vayomer, and he announces, Achein yesh Hashem b'makam hazeh. Hashem is still with us. Hashem was always with us. V'anoichi lo yadati. It was my subjective, mistaken understanding that I didn't realize. I didn't realize what this process was. Yaakov Avinu says, I thought that when Am Yisrael are in exile, HaKadosh Baruch Hu azvam, HaKadosh Baruch Hu forsakes us, and he conceals himself, and he doesn't focus on us. It's remarkable, the Berditch of Arav putting words, paraphrasing Yaakov Avinu, telling us what Yaakov Avinu said. Aval ata ani roya. Yaakov Avinu came to the realization, now I see, Sha'Hashem imahem, that Hashem was always with them. Ve'ein zakim, beis elikim, wherever they go, they carry the Shechina. Sha'Shechina imahem, yoishebes begolusa. Hashem is accompanying us within exile. Hashem has not forsaken us. We're not just left out fluttering in the wind. There is a process here. Hashem is the captain. Right? And this whole experience was therefore for our good in some way. So then Yaakov Avinu goes back to what he was contemplating before the stone split into 12 pieces. Because what does he find now? That the stone is once again unified. Likach even asher samir ashoisav. He finds the reunified Knesset Yisrael after their long and turbulent journey throughout history. But he finds this foundation that he had rested his thinking on, that he had focused on. And Yaakov Avinu sees Knesset Yisrael as an established structure once more. And he said, this is worth it. I'm going to bring children into the world. I'm going to perpetuate the Jewish legacy. I'm going to do all that I can to keep the flame alive. Because there is an end to this story. And it ends well. Vayitzak shemen al roisha. Kabbalah, shemen, oil, is always a reference to very deep, broad-minded, expansive thinking. That's called chachma, intellect. And then Yaakov Avinu just drew it down into his life. He said, this is worth it. Yeah, there's going to be gullus, and there's going to be fragmentation, and there's going to be constriction and confusion, but we're going to come out of it. And I tell you, every single one of you listening to this, and whoever's going to be listening to this afterwards, we are bringing this thing to the finish line. I literally mean that, we. There are so few people learning Torah of this kind, speaking this language, so few. And we need to increase this. We need to increase this. It's the simplest thing. It's the most obvious thing. We need to be talking about Hashem. We need to be talking about the mission of the Jewish nation. We need to be thinking about the world, not just about how to get more funding for our schools, so we can carry on with our... We have to mamash think big, 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 big. Because we are that generation that's bringing this whole thing to the finish line. Now. Mamish now. Mamish now. And so this is what Yaakov Avinu did. He invested in this. Asher hu even hayesoid. He poured chachma onto this unified stone he knew would become fragmented, because he knew that eventually it would come back together again and be all the better for it. And again, he instituted it as one unified nation, one unified story, one unified structure. And he invested it with the consciousness that would be lost, but you and me are reclaiming now. That Am Yisrael in Yiddishkeit is not about our own personal development and our own personal growth, and certainly not about our own personal schar and olam haba. None of this. It's about Gilui Shechina Dir B'Tachtonim. It's about each member of Am Yisrael coming together with all other members of Am Yisrael so that we can literally change the world and erase pain from existence. It's on me and it's on you. Much bigger than our own little considerations. We have a world to heal. The whole world is waiting for us. The whole world is waiting for us. To bind the collective soul of the Jewish nation with its source, with Hashem, so they can become a channel. With this we end. I know we're going over time, but it's such a delicious piece, such an important, crucial piece. Vayikra Shem Hamakom Beis Kel. He says, this is Beis Kel. This perspective, this understanding of what Am Yisrael is. They're a Beis Kel. Shehu Bayis. Am Yisrael, it's just a receptacle for godliness. Umadur Shem Kel. That there the name of Hashem dwells. And the pasuk ends, V'zesha Amar Kasav Ulam Luz Shem Ha'ir L'Rishayna. But initially, the name of this city was Luz. What is Luz? Many of us are aware that we have a bone in the body called a Luz bone. That's right in the back of the neck. That's like that bumpy part right in the nape of the neck. That Chazal, the Ari HaKadosh says that after a person is buried, after 120, every other part of the body can waste away, but the Luz bone is always there, and from that little bone is going to be built up Knesset, is going to be built up the whole body in Tchias HaMesim. So says the Berditchever, how beautiful. That's seen in the context, understanding the Psukim here as a reference to the fragmentation, to the rot that Am Yisrael would experience throughout Gullus, to the death and the splitting apart of the unified body with the departure of the soul, etc., that which we spoke about before Tisha B'Av. It's the same thing. Everything was already under the surface. It was there, it just wasn't being accessed. And that even though it may look like we went into exile, we lost it all, but the Luz was the name of this Beis Kel. What would ultimately be revealed as this unified nation reflecting the light of God. Only at the end of time, after a long interim hiatus of it looking like a mess, the truth is, it was the Luz. It was always there. It's indestructible. Because the whole creation relies on this. There was never a doubt, there was never a question, however much we flickered and however much we shook. There wasn't a hava amina for a second that we had lost it. Luz, indestructible. Dar v'dar, in every generation, ad ukva de Mashiach, until our times, until the time when we're standing on the threshold of Geula, the coming of Mashiach. It was just hidden like the Luz bone, buried deep under the ground, covered over. Ke'ever echad, and he explains Ever echad yesh ba'adam. There's one bone in the structure of the person. Sheshmai luz, that's called luz. V'hu nischi asher mizeha nitzchi, and it's eternal. Asher mizeha Ever neshava binyan adam shel kol ramach ivarim. V'gam le'isat tchia. From there is born all the limbs of the person, and the same is true la'asad lavo in tchias hamesim. All the body will be rebuilt. Kol haguf mizeha Ever. Kizeha Ever ein nirkav. It never rots. In Cain, therefore, we're going to build up the body back from that one tiny little point, that luz bone. It must contain the life force of all the other limbs. It's like this ethereal, quasi-spiritual, metaphysical substance. Cain ha'evan haresha. That's how it is with our national essence, with our collective soul. Which is that initial spark that serves as the foundation for the whole nation. What was, what is, and what will be. But Yaakov Avinu dealt with this, impacted this, contemplated this, figured out practical ways of improving things. And he took it from its luz state, where it's just hidden, where its potential, the whole body is wrapped up in, it was called luz, and he said, okay, luz, it's very beautiful that you're there somewhere. Let's make you into base kel. Let's actualize you. Let's hang out for 2,000 years, work through what we need to work through, come out on the other side of a Holocaust, come back to Eretz Yisrael, deal with a world that still hates us because largely they're waiting for us to actually be us. Let's reclaim our mission, our vision. Let's educate our children like soldiers of light. Let's be big. Big. And let's take this thing to the finish line. Yaakov Avinu said enough. We're going to take this thing from a state of potentiality, and we're going to do it. We're just going to do it for real. We're going to go on the offense. And this is what Yaakov Avinu did, my namesake. And he said, let's actually do this. All recognizing that it's not us. It's Hashem running this whole long thing. But we have to be blind not to see what's next. And he says, we're not going to go any longer than this. A reminder to me to just end it here. V'haven, and understand this well, the doik, and examine it. Because it contains the whole thing. This piece, everything. Mamish, everything. So we should be zocheh to channel, and I'm blessing myself primarily because I struggle with this, to channel our frustration in positive ways and to figure out how b'darchei noyam to really just slowly but surely begin to battle the darkness with light. With light. But things are going to get a whole lot better very soon. Be'ezus Hashem. And I believe that this chabura is a part of it. These teachings are a part of it. These perspectives are a part of it. And off we go to the Geula. That's how I feel. Off we go.